studios in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
George Lucas is here. He is the creator of Star Wars, the most successful film franchise in film history. Through his company, Lucasfilm, he has advanced filmmaking technology and crafted some of the most memorable characters in movie history. Though a writer and producer on numerous projects, he's only directed 5 films, and here is a look at them.
Command lock pending.
Priority shift. Cut the line. Hold.
I don't think I'm gonna be going tomorrow.
Come on, what are you talking about?
Well, I was thinking I could wait a year, you know, go to city for a while.
You chicken
Oh,
thing.
wait a minute.
After all we went through to get accepted, we're finally getting out of this turkey town, and now you want to crawl back into your cell, right?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
See through you. We can.
Be mindful of your feelings.
Your thoughts dwell on your mother.
I miss her.
Afraid to lose her, I think.
What does that got to do with anything?
Everything. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Why couldn't I save her? I know I could have.
Sometimes there are things no one can fix. You're not all powerful.
Well, I should be. Someday I will be. I will be the most powerful Jedi ever. I promise you. I will even learn to stop people from dying.
However, you may not be familiar with his first film, the innovative THX 1138. The director's cut is being released in theaters and on DVD. Here is the trailer for the film.
For more enjoyment and greater efficiency, consumption is being standardized.
Buy now.
Buy more. Buy more now. Buy.
If you have a problem, don't hesitate to ask for assistance.
Failure to do so may result in prosecution for criminal drug evasion.
Performance perfect is perfect performance.
Remember, an interval overdose may cause a serious chemical imbalance.
What's wrong? What's wrong?
This is City Probe Scanner. We've run across some illegal sexual activity. Keep up the good work and prevent accidents. This shift is concluded.
Francis Ford Coppola calls that a minor classic, your very first film. I want to talk about it in just a minute, but let me just say this, that you are at work on Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, which will complete the Star Wars saga when it is released in 2005. I am pleased to have George Lucas at this table for the very first time. Welcome.
Thank you.
You think it's a minor classic?
Pardon?
You think THX is a minor classic?
It's been known as what we call a cult classic, which is what you say about a film that doesn't have an audience, except for a very small group of very dedicated fans.
You've only made 5 films.
5 films in 35 years.
Why is that?
Well, in the meantime, I've produced a lot of films.
I know, yeah. And you've built a studio.
And I
you've done
built
a
a
whole
bunch
lot
of
other
companies,
stuff.
and most importantly, I raised 3 kids. So after Return of the Jedi, I basically stopped, directing films, and I went and spent time raising. At that point, I had just been divorced, and so I was raising a young daughter who was like a year and a half old, and so I said, I'm just going to stop and raise her. That's more important to me than making movies. And so I worked, producing things and stuff, but where I could go to work at 11 o'clock in the morning and get off at 4 in the afternoon and skip a day if I wanted to, and whatever I needed to do, and then adopted another daughter, and then adopted a son. And, during that whole period, which was over 15 years, I just basically raised kids and was in semi-retirement, so to speak, in terms of directing.
I'm telling this story out of church, but Warren Beatty and I saw him the other day, and I said to him, how come you haven't made any movies? And he said exactly the same thing. He said, I'm having too much fun raising my kids. Yeah. He said, I feel a little guilty about it, but I'm having too much fun.
Well, it's a priority.
Was it?
You have a priority in your life. And when you have kids, there's nothing like it, and they don't wait.
And you can't have somebody else do it.
And you can't really have somebody else do it, and it's really it really is a joy to do, and it's one of the true meanings of life is to raise your kids.
When you were growing up, Republican household, your father, as I remember, ran some kind of little store. What was it?
It was a office equipment,
office
furniture.
Could I find there, at that time, the guy that George Lucas became? The artist he became, the businessman he became, the filmmaker he became, the artist?
I certainly couldn't have. I don't think anybody would have at that point. I was kind of a underachiever, typical kid who got into a fair amount of trouble. The great thing about my parents is they both had faith in me.
Yeah.
Especially my mother, but even my father had faith in me. And no matter what I did in terms of displaying the fact that I wasn't going to amount to anything, they sort of under it all sort of had faith that
they believed there was something there that would eventually emerge.
They would believe that I would be okay. My father would say, well, he'll be a late bloomer. He always used to say that. He used to say, oh, don't worry, he's a late bloomer.
So he never worried.
But he had to do that all the way through high school and in the beginning of college.
When you look at Steven Spielberg, and hanging out in movie theaters and sort of living his childhood, they say, on film in the beginning, or the child that he became the movies he made, that wasn't you.
No, when I was young, I was more involved in cars. I really loved cars and racing and that sort of thing. And then when I finally settled down and got to school, which was when I started college, I was really an anthropology major. I had an interest in art and painting and illustration and that sort of thing. But it really wasn't until my junior year in college that I even knew anything about movies, that I sort of discovered film by going to USC and thinking that I was going to like a photography school, but it was really a school of cinema.
Yeah. Was any particular movie that motivated you and inspired you and made you believe that this could be a home for George Lucas?
Well, it wasn't. Up to that point, I'd had an interest in the social sciences and that sort of thing, and that's what sort of motivated me. But it wasn't like a burning desire. It was an intellectual interest. But as soon as I got to film school, and it was, it's a regular liberal arts program, so I had to take Spanish and science and math and all those other things too. But as soon as I got into a film class, which was film appreciation, and then the other class I had was an animation class, I instantly knew that this was for me, that this was it. This is something, I don't know. When I started, I looked at the films that were being made. I loved the films. I was exposed to films I'd never seen before, because coming from a small town in Central California, we didn't have foreign films there. my only real exposure to sort of avant-garde films that you wouldn't find in a regular theater was the sort of underground movement in San Francisco, which I was very acquainted with. And I would go up there when I was at junior college in Modesto, and I would go up there in high school and drive up to San Francisco, and we'd go to these little funny surf theaters and things like the little art theaters and see these really wild Kenyan cinema films and that sort of thing. And so that would have been my only experience with film. And so when I got to USC, I got to see all the great films that had been made. You know, everything from Orson Welles to Kurosawa to, everything, D.W. Griffith. And it was just a complete eye-opener to me. And then at the same time, I started working on my animation project. And I realized I really knew how to do this. And I made an animated film.
How did you know how to do it?
I don't know, I just did.
You had an instinct for it.
I had an instinct for it. And they gave me a 1 minute of film, which was to test the animation camera with. I made a movie out of it. It won 16 or 17 film festivals. And so everything I did there, I succeeded at rather wildly. Every movie I made was a success. And I just realized that I know how to do this. And I love doing it. And, it's one of those things you eat, sleep, and drink movies, and you love every second of it.
But then I come back, only 5. I mean, you explain why, but only 5 movies, even though you've influenced a lot of other movies. You've been part of them, you've written, and you've produced, but...
Well, it's
if there are 5 as good as this, maybe that's enough.
Well, I wanted to do other movies, but again, your life goes down funny tracks. Let's say, if you'd asked me when I was in high school what I would be doing, the last thing I would have ever said was making movies. I didn't even know you could go to school. I didn't have any idea or desire or anything. And then when I was in film school, if you said, well, you're going to do theatrical films, I thought I was going to be a documentary filmmaker. I thought I was going to be a cameraman, editor, make Kenyan cinema, avant-garde, crazy movies. I never thought that I would go into the theatrical business. I had no interest in it.
But did you know you were a storyteller?
And I didn't know I was a storyteller.
Because that is a signal quality you have that most people believe.
I was interested in storytelling, and I was interested in, how stories... I was interested in literature and that sort of thing. But it wasn't that I didn't crave to be a writer or anything. I didn't, I wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to be an illustrator. That I wanted to do, but that was about as far as that sort of area went. So as I went along, and I sort of did THX, which was as close as I could get to of a theatrical film, and I did it just because, well, this is the only chance I'll ever get to do something like this. I might as well take advantage of it and have a good time. So I did that, and then after that, Francis said, well, look, you've done this crazy art film. Why don't you see if you can do a comedy?
This is because you were Francis' assistant by then?
Well, by this time, he was producing my movies.
Okay.
He produced THX, and he was going off to now do The Godfather. Right. And while he was going off to The Godfather, he says, instead of doing that, why don't you try something warm and fuzzy? And I said, well, I can do warm and fuzzy. He said, well, I'll bet you can. And I said, well, I'll show you. I can do warm and fuzzy. So I'd had an interest just from my days in taking anthropology, because I'd done had a very strong interest in the mating rituals of American teenagers, which, is kind of like it is in a lot of countries where you have the city plaza and the kids wander around the plaza and, parade in front of the opposite sex. But we did it in cars. We were the only country at that point, after World War II, that did it in cars, because we were the only country wealthy enough to do that kind of ridiculous thing. And by the time it was the end of the 60s, that phenomenon had pretty much disappeared, because hippies, drugs, rock and that whole thing had taken over. The thing that American Graffiti was about ultimately is the end of that era, and so I had an interest in that, and I decided that I'd combine Francis's dare with my interest in documenting this particular phenomenon, which nobody had made a movie about. I mean, not a realistic movie, and I came up with American Graffiti, which again. Took me years to get it off the ground. Nobody wanted to do it. They said it wasn't really a movie. It was just a montage with a lot of music. There was no characters, no plot. Again, I thought it was a real straightforward movie, and the industry, everybody I talked to said, no, this is weird like your first movie.
Yeah.
This is just another one
Here's
of those
a story
weird
I heard, that there was a screening somewhere, and you were there and Francis was there. I think this is true, but you tell me. And you screened it for some executive. And the audience was enthusiastic. I mean, at the first sound of the music, they were cheering.
Right.
And at everything. And they were laughing and all of this. And you and Francis were thrilled. And the executive stands up as soon as it's over and says, I can't release this movie. It's unreleasable.
Right.
Francis goes ballistic.
Yep.
And didn't speak to this guy for 20 years.
Well, what Francis did is he said, I'll buy this movie from you right now. I said, here, I'll write you a check. You know,
Francis said that to the executive. Was it Ned Tannen or somebody like that? Or?
Well, the thing of it is that the executive thought that the audience was stacked. You know, that it was just a bunch of...
You guys had brought your friends in.
We'd all brought our friends in to make it look good. But we hadn't. It was a real, you know, what we call a shopping mall audience. We went out in shopping malls and gave free tickets away to the screening. And so, I mean, there were a couple of my friends there, but he had just decided that it was fake, that nobody could react to a movie like that. And he had problems with it.
So he was reacting to the movie, the audience's reaction rather than to the movie?
He just discounted the audience reactions. He said, that doesn't count, that's fake. So I just look at the movie, I don't understand the movie, I don't think it works, it's too confusing. Again, it has too much music in it. You can't intercut 4 stories. You gotta remember, now everybody does this. It's a standard in television, it's a standard in movies, but in those days, you just didn't make a movie and intercut 4 different stories.
You had one straight narrative line.
Yeah, you told each story with each character by itself. You didn't intercut things like that. So it was very, you know, progressive for its day, way too progressive for the studio. And even after we argued about changing it and doing that sort of thing, they decided that it really wasn't a theatrical film and they were going to release it as a TV movie. And it wasn't really until we had a whole bunch of screenings. So what we did is some TV executives wanted to see it. So we told everybody in the studio, all the secretaries, all the runners, everybody that worked in the studio would come and see the screening. We always said, well, we can't do it during the day, we have to do it at night. Yeah. So we'd always do it at 7 o'clock at night. We'd invite everybody from the studio to come and see the film so that no executive saw it by himself. And the reaction, obviously, was exactly the same as it was at our first screening. You know, people just went crazy. And then people started telling other people at other studios, and pretty soon the buzz went around Hollywood that, wow, this is a great movie, you got to get a chance to see it. And so, you know, after about 3 or 4 months of screenings, probably, you know, 2 dozen screenings at least, the word really got out that the film was a great movie to go see, and everybody wanted to see it, and so then the studio changed its mind and decided to release it.
Now, I know people who talk about you, and they say after American Graffiti, George went to do Star Wars, and that it took him in a whole different direction, and that whatever it was that he was on, whatever path he was on, simply Star Wars took him and diverted him. And some would like to see you go back to where you were and pick up at that point as a filmmaker.
I intend to go back, but the diversion really happened after THX.
Right.
Because that's where I was, and I was going to go back and make really non-verbal visual films. But I had this opportunity to do a feature film. I mean, which was THX. I did it. And then that opened a door to do another feature film. And so I tried to do that, which was American Graffiti.
Right.
And I never expect this road of opportunity to extend very far. I figured my first film was a failure, my second film will be a failure, and I'd probably never get the third film off the ground.
Yes.
So I wasn't too worried about it changing my career or anything because I didn't expect anything to happen. I expected, well, I'll go down this path as long as I can, but I know it's really hard to stay on this path, and as soon as they tell me to get out of town, you know, I'll just stop making these movies and go back to what I really want to do. But I'm not going to pass up the opportunity when it presents itself. And one of the opportunities I wanted to do, which is way back then when I decided I would sort of explore this area of theatrical filmmaking and storytelling, was I wanted to do an actual real Hollywood movie, you know, with sound stages and sets and makeup and hair and costumes and all the things that, you know, I made street films. You know, they're very, very, very cheap, just by the seat of your pants movies, and I never made a real, you know, classic studio movie. And I wanted to do that just once. And so that's where Star Wars came in, because I was interested in telling a particular kind of story.
What story were you interested in telling?
Well, I wanted to tell a modern myth that was in the classic mode and motif of old mythology. And I came to this conclusion that the Western was the last of the American mythology. The Western was the last time we sort of dealt with our culture and what we expect from our society and what the rules are and what the lessons we've learned. That all was in Westerns. Once we got past the Western, which was in sort of the late 50s, early 60s, the culture, which was the Vietnam War, and the political situation, and the nature of the way we changed, that mythology was thrown out, and nobody decided to pass it on to the next generation. It was just not hip.
It was just dropped.
It was dropped. So I said, I really want to do something in that old, taking what a mythology does, which is to take values and expectations and the things that have been learned by the one generation and pass it on to the next generation.
Inspired by people like John Ford and...
Well, yeah, John Ford did it, went all the way back to Homer.
Yeah.
Everybody did it. I mean, that's the earliest form of entertainment was the storyteller who sat around the fire and told stories. And they
about heroes, about myth, about courage.
And what they really were for was to inspire the next generation to carry on the same values that the last generation has had. And what do we expect of you? What have we learned that you should sort of take with you? Crime doesn't pay, that sort of thing. But it's just simple.
What is the reservoir of our wisdom that we've learned that we give to you?
Yeah, that we expect to, and so they would tell stories, and those stories would then, intuitively you would learn. They weren't lectures, you will do this and you will not, It's subtler than that. And because the storytelling isn't confrontational, you can sort of listen to the story and you get your little bits of advice out of it. But I was just curious the fact that those stories weren't being told anymore. Yeah. I mean, the motifs, not exactly the stories themselves, but the motifs that were in those stories, the sort of psychological underpinnings. And I was curious, and then I thought I would like to take that and put it in a modern context, and I'd like to use as a vehicle Saturday matinee serials, which were these really high-powered action adventures that existed for 15 minutes, and each Saturday they'd show a different one. And if you missed one, you just sort of picked it up, and so you never really saw, unless you were a really avid moviegoer, you never saw the whole thing. You only saw parts of it. Right. So it was designed to be like that. It was designed to start in episode 4. You're in the middle of this thing, and that would be the end of it. It was one movie.
Right.
It just grew to be 3 movies, unfortunately, because I wrote more than I expected. But that is then what sidetracked me, because Star Wars, became so successful that it kind of took over my life in terms of it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up, in terms of I was determined to make all 3 films right from the very get-go. As soon as I wrote them and I put 2 of them on the shelf, I said, I will get back. I promise I will end up doing these 2 movies no matter what.
So you put the scripts on the shelf?
So I put the script on the shelves. I said, I'll do this one because this is all I can afford to do at this point. And I'll make this movie, and then when it fails, I'll do everything I can to get the next one made, and when that one fails, I'll do everything to get the next one made. That was my mindset at the time.
So when you think now about what Peter Jackson did with The Ring, what do you think?
Well, he was faced with exactly the same situation. And he had to be more clever. I mean, he took a different route, which is to convince the studio to make all 3 movies. And sort of get them pregnant with all of them.
And he had the advantage of Star Wars being part of the...
Well, I don't think it was any easier. It wasn't any easier.
No, not easier, but you mean the cell wasn't any easier?
No, the cell wasn't easier, and basically what he did was say, well, I'll do all of them at once, and it'll cost the same price as if I did one. Yeah. And somebody bought that story. And then later on, he said, oh, yeah, and by the way, I didn't really shoot all of them. I only shot a little bit of each one, and now we're going to have to pay for all of them.
Exactly.
But by then it was too late, and he was lucky that it was, he did a fantastic job. It was extremely successful, so that it was okay for the other ones to be done.
But you knew at the time you were locked into 3.
Yeah, and I knew that I assumed that I was going to fail all the way through it.
Why did you assume you were going to fail?
Well, because that's what normally happens. 9 out of 10 movies fail.
Yeah. And fear of the unknown is part of the theme of this.
Well, it's just, as a filmmaker, you've got to be real practical, which is you're always looking to get your next film made. And you're assuming that this one isn't going to be a giant hit. So you're assuming that you're not going to be worth any more after the film as you are before it. And if it doesn't work at all, then you're going to be worth less in terms of your power to get another movie made.
Only as good as your last movie.
You're only as good as, and that's a real thing, and that's something you live with. And if you're a filmmaker, you definitely want to get your next film made, but you don't want to compromise your vision. So if you put those two things together, the obvious conclusion is that it will fail because my vision's too wacky. I mean, you got to remember in those days, even Star Wars was experimental. Even Star Wars was something the studios, you know, a couple studios turned it down. Alan Ladd Jr., when he gave me the go-ahead, he said, look, I don't understand this script. I don't understand your movie, but I think you're a talented guy, and whatever you do is okay with me.
Man, that's a hell of an executive, isn't it?
That's a great executive. That's somebody that says, I'm going to invest in talent. I'm not going to invest in this project.
Right.
I'm going to invest in somebody that I believe in. And he reaped the rewards of that. And he had to fight the board and everybody else because nobody else believed in it or understood it. So it wasn't like a slam dunk, oh my God, it's Star Wars. It was this weird movie with Wookiees and robots, you know, going back to robots again.
And not stars that everybody, there
no
were
stars.
Huge stars at the time.
No stars. Only Alec Guinness, and he wasn't considered a bankable star at the time. He was a very, very good actor.
And nobody knew Harrison.
Yeah, no, none of these actors had any kind of name.
But here's what comes to bear at this is this thing that I've always been curious about with you, is that storyteller, filmmaker, you are that. How much of you is that, and how much of you, based on the conversation you just had in the last 3 minutes, is equal part businessman, practical, hard-nosed guy who understands the practicality of what he's in and understands the dynamics of that? Plus, there's this other element, which is that you are on the cutting edge of where technology is with respect to the storytelling business you're in.
Well,
I mean,
again,
having skill in one of those arenas is enough.
Well, it's not that unusual, really. Because in the end, all artists face the same drama. And if you have an artist who is really pig-headed and really stubborn and really determined to get his vision the way he wants it, he's going to have to learn how to manipulate the situation to get what he wants. And, you know, whether it's Michelangelo or whether it's somebody drawing on a cave wall, some artists don't have that ability. You know, Mozart didn't have that ability. He was a genius, but he didn't quite figure out how the system worked.
Picasso figured it out.
Picasso figured it out.
Big time.
And so to have somebody that says, look, in order to get my vision out there, I've really got to learn how to manipulate the system in order to make it work. So that part is easy in terms of you either are very lucky and you get patrons and you sort of go along and you're this incredible genius that sort of overcomes the system, which is really hard to do because the system is designed really to tear you down and destroy everything that you're doing and push it off to the side. So to get through that, you just have to be really dogged and really persistent and really say, I am going to overcome this. Then on the other side, every artist is faced with the problem of technology because art is technology. From the first caveman that picked up a piece of slate and started drawing on a wall, that's a very human endeavor. You know, because only humans know how to do that. That's what art is. And what art, from my definition, is that art is a way of expressing emotion, communicating emotion to other people without having to growl, snarl, or bite somebody's tail, but through drawings or art or creating something that is akin to what you feel when you see a rose. No other animals sort of look at a rose and say, look, feel what this happens when I look at this rose.
Look at it and smell it.
Why is it? Now, I am going to duplicate that feeling. I'm going to pick up a piece of rock and I am going to recreate so that when you look at this, you'll feel something akin to what that is when you look at a sunset or a thing. And I'm going to try to duplicate that feeling.
So other people will feel the emotion I felt.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, the cavemen didn't articulate that, but in the end, that was what they were trying to do. And then that went all the way through history. But every time there was a new invention, whether it was the invention of the word, whether it was the invention of, well, first probably came music. First came the drum or the beating on the log. And then out of that, you know, you progress through art to a place where we get to cinema, which is the most, technological of all the art forms. And you're faced with the same problem that everybody else was faced with. You know, a Michelangelo who painted frescoes was very happy to do oil paintings because the idea that you could go outside and see real sunlight, the idea that you could go and paint over things that you've done, the idea that you need a giant crew there to help you mix the colors and that they dry the right color, and you had, fresco painting is very much like movie making in a way, in that it takes a huge amount of people all cooperating and all being very talented. You got the artist, but you have all this support group behind the artist. Whereas oil painting sort of got rid of most of that support group and allowed the artist to sort of work on his own time in his own way and change his mind and go through a series
Get up in the morning and paint over what he did the night before.
Have a thought process that goes on. You're not sort of instantly committed. I think both forms of art are equally valid and equally beautiful and equally wonderful. But the artists were always saying, if only I could. And by being able to go outside with oil paintings, we had the whole Impressionist movement.
Okay, but are you saying to the technology that George Lucas wanted to do things, and so he asked in the famous expression, ask not why, but why not? How do I accomplish this? Because there's no other filmmaker, there's no other filmmaker that's accomplished what you have in the technological arena. You have used tools to tell stories better than anyone.
But it's, I wouldn't say that.
Well, they're patents and they're everything else. I mean,
there's Leonardo da Vinci. He was one of those guys.
Fair enough.
But there, people, there's artists who struggled and said, I really want this ocean to look blue like it really looks, and there is no blue. So the artist would go out and invent the color blue.
And so what was the dilemma for George Lucas then?
What was inventing a vision,
blue for you?
Which you see in episode 4, 5, and 6, which when I first finished Star Wars and everybody said, well, gee, this is fantastic, it's great. What do you think about it? I said, well, it didn't really turn out that well. I'm not really happy with it. If you read any of my interviews at that point, that's what I said. It's only about 25% of what I wanted it to be. And people thought I was out of my mind.
Yeah.
In fact, it was probably 75% of what I wanted it to be, but to me it felt emotionally like it was only 25%. But it was far short of what I really wanted. So when I got the opportunity later on to actually fix that 25% and make the film be the way I wanted it to be and have it be so I could be happy when I watched it instead of depressed and, gee, I wish I had the time, I wish I had the money, I wish they hadn't taken it away from me, I wish I didn't have a release date and all that kind of stuff. I fixed it. The changes aren't very much, but it made a huge difference to me. And it's the same thing in terms of the technology, which is I wish I could have had, just the problem of Yoda. Just to get to Yoda was a technological revolution of taking the world of puppetry and creating a puppet that was so real that it looked alive and didn't look like a puppet. And I worked with Jim Henson, I worked with Frank Oz, and a lot of anxiety went through, can we make this thing seem like a real living creature instead of just a Muppet? He's supposed to be a warrior, and I'd love to have him fight, and I'd love to have him do all these, but I can't do it. I can't tell that part of the story. And that, I can't tell that part of the story was sort of a daily ritual with, Star Wars and myself.
Right.
And I was frustrated. So I was constantly pushing to tell the story, but the story was way beyond the technology's ability to do it. It's like I was doing frescoes and I really wanted to be doing oil painting. Right. So in the end, I was forced to sort of invent oil painting in order to be able to do what I wanted to do. But all artists go through that. That's how we progress to where we are today. It's just artists saying, I want to be able to do this, and it's not possible at that point. And somebody is dogged enough to go through the process of learning how to do it. We have, it's with cameras. We have faster film, we have faster lenses, we have high-speed cameras, we have slow motion, all these, widescreen, color, sound, all these things where the artist's saying, I want that power that I don't have. I need more storytelling power.
But here is the question. How many artists who say, I wish I had more power to tell the story, I'm bound to give full expression to the ideas that I want to tell, how many of them go to the lengths that you do and did to tell your story? That's what makes you different. And that's where you have broken new ground. You've got to accept that idea, that reality.
It's a crossing of events. You need somebody really crazy who really loves movies and is dedicated, and then you have to have that person suddenly become very successful and not care about the success, but care about movies more. And when you get those two things together, you end up with, because there's lots of movies.
Star Wars.
There's a lot of crazy filmmakers out there that would be doing what I'm doing if they only had the money to do it with.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people with the money, especially the studios, that could do what I do, but they don't care about movies, so that they don't want to do it. So you have to have somebody that loves movies and wants to move forward. And in my particular case, I got myself into a situation with Star Wars where I was telling stories that you couldn't tell any other way. And at the same time, I'm a history buff. I love history, I love historical movies, but those can't be made. And when I was doing Star Wars in the 70s and the 60s, right, you couldn't make historical films. It was just impossible because you couldn't afford to do it anymore. And I was always looking forward to saying, well, I'm going to do this historical thing, I'm going to do this historical thing. But in order to do that, we had to move the technology forward and able to do that. So this technology moving forward just said, instead of doing this narrow gamut of movies that the industry has found itself in, which are mostly, dramas and light comedies and things that are all contemporary, or an occasional Western or something, I thought we should have a broader palette. I thought, my imagination goes way beyond what people are doing right now. I want to make, epic historical films, and I want to make science fiction films, and I don't want to be constrained by the technology.
Do you think that is as important a contribution as you have made as, in fact, the stories that you told?
I don't know, because I think the technology moves forward anyway. It's like this little period in time, I will get maybe mentioned as a very slight footnote in the fact that when we made the transition from the photochemical process to the digital process, right, they'll say, oh yeah, and there's this guy who was involved in that. But that'll be about all it comes down to in the end. I hope people for generations will still enjoy the movies, and they will be important to young people's lives, and I think that will be more important.
And that's what you're proudest of, the stories you told.
The other part was just to get there.
Let me just talk about
I had to build the road to get where I wanted to go. And, all right, I get credit for building the road, but the point is I really wanted to get somewhere. And where I got to was more important to me than actually having to build the road to get there.
Will we know the answer to this question? As good as Star Wars is, has its demand on you, its pull on you, kept you from making some extraordinary films? Do you have any sense of that in your head?
Well, there's a lot of movies that I want to make.
There's a finite amount of time.
Yes.
And there is a genuine love of what's important, which is children.
Well, at the same time, my kids are getting older now. That's why I got to go back and do more Star Wars. And when I went back to do more Star Wars, I had a very soul-searching discussion with myself about, should I go off and do these 3 Star Wars, or should I go off and do these other movies that I want to do? Because now I'm ready. My kids are old enough I can go back and make direct movies, which is what I wanted to do. And I said, I opted for the Star Wars thing because, again, it was one of these, well, the opportunity is there, and I think I'd be foolish not to do it. But that's why there won't be any more Star Wars. Because I have finished it now.
Exactly.
It's finished, and I have no reason to go and do any more of them. And I do have a lot of other movies that I want to make, and a lot of other projects that I want to get involved in. And Star Wars is just very all-consuming. It's just, I don't have time to do a lot of other things. So now I'm released from that obligation. I enjoyed the experience enormously, but I'm ready to move on and do other things because I have a lot of other things to do. Will I ever get them all done? I don't think so.
Will you get some of them done?
I will get some of them done.
Now, do they involve what kinds of movies?
Well, there's a series of kinds of movies. Some that I want to produce.
Right.
Some that I've been working on for a long time. I'm doing a film about the Tuskegee Airmen that I've been working on for, half my life, it seems like, trying to get that to happen somehow, which I'll produce. I'm going to do some television shows. I love television. It's a great medium, and I've had a good time in it.
It sure is.
Doing the Young Indie series. And then there's a lot of documentaries I want to do.
On what kinds of subjects?
Well, I'm doing, right now I've got a very large group of documentary workers creating 100 films that's going to go on to the DVDs for the Young Indiana Jones series. Because that's a historical series about traveling through history, meeting famous people of the early 20th century, and now I'm combining it with documentaries about all the people and things and events that actually are in the series itself. So I've been working on that kind of on the side besides Star Wars. That's my other project. But we're going to do other documentaries. I want to do a documentary about slavery, and I have like 3 or 4 things lined up.
For television or for feature film release?
For myself.
For yourself, absolutely.
I am in a position now where I have got a nest egg, and I can make the movies that I want to do, make the TV shows, make everything I want to make. I don't have to. The only reason it's fun is because I don't have to answer to anybody. I don't have anybody telling me what to do. I make it, and then I turn around and sell it. And if somebody doesn't want to buy it, that's fine. If they look at it and say, we'll buy this, that's fine. But they don't have any input into it. I'll do whatever I want. That's what I've earned. That's what I've been struggling for all these years in the end, to be able to do what I want to do without a lot of corporate interference and craziness. Yeah. And, you know, and I felt strongly enough about it to where I dedicated myself to getting to a point where I could be independent enough to not have to, you know, go down the path of compromise for the sake of somebody who isn't really that interested in what you're doing anyway.
But are you saying you just got to that point?
Pretty much. I've always had to invest everything in what I've been doing. So, like with all the Star Wars films, I took everything I made out of Star Wars and invested in Empire Strikes Back. I took everything that I made in Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars and I put it into Return of the Jedi. When I finished all that, unfortunately, I got a divorce, and that sort of set me back quite a ways. So then I had to kind of start over again. So then it took me 6 years to get back to the point where I was financially even and build my companies up. And then I started working again. And then I decided one of the reasons to go back to Star Wars was that it would hopefully make me financially secure enough to where I wouldn't have to go to a studio and beg for money.
It's a sure thing.
And so I took all the money that I had at that point and I invested it in The Phantom Menace, and then I did the other one, and now I've got it all in this one. And when this one comes out, hopefully it'll all come back.
And when will this one come out?
Next summer, next May.
So it's a May release.
Yeah.
And have you finished photography?
I finished photography. I shoot for about 60 days, and then I come back. That was a year ago, summer. I was in Australia shooting. This August, I went back again and shot for another 10 days. It's the way I like to shoot the film, look at it, rewrite it, change it while I'm editing, and then go back and shoot the rest of it rather than shoot it all at once. Because I think of it as more of, stepping back from a painting. I don't just start in the top corner and work my way across.
Well, where do you start?
Well, I start with the sketch.
Yeah.
And then I sort of put it one level layer on, and then I come step back and then I put another layer on. But it's layered this way. It's not just completed that way.
Somebody once said about you and Francis, the difference was, and I'll try to, I can't remember exactly how it was that one worked from large down to small. That was you, I think. And Francis worked from small to big, or maybe I have it wrong. Which is it? Or does it make... does that make sense to you?
I don't know. A lot of what I've learned from Francis. So there's a lot of similarities between the way we work. And he does it the same way. What I learned about making films, I was really an editor and a cameraman. And Francis sort of took me by the scruff of the neck and said, "You're going to learn to be a writer, or you're never going to be a director." And sort of moved me into theatrical filmmaking. But he's, very good with actors. He's very good with story, plot, character. And so he pushed me through that process. And his way to write a script is you sit down and you write it in a week. You never look back. You just race it out.
Is that the way he did Godfather?
He does everything that way.
Yeah.
And he'll write it real fast. He'll go back, and then he'll look and see what he did, and then he'll do it again. And then he'll look back and see what he did, and he'll do it again. And you keep rewriting it, but you don't try to finish the first 10 pages and then move to the next 10 pages.
Right, no, that's the way I work,
Yeah, you end up with a beautifully written 15-page script that you'll never finish.
Exactly right. You have to go from you have to go to A to Z.
Yeah.
And then you can go back and refine every single step.
And it's the same thing with painting, or it's the same thing with making films, as far as I'm concerned. You sort of do a wash on it, and you see kind of where you are, only I like to do it with the film, not on a script.
Tell me about the relationship between the two of you. Is it mentor-protege? Is it brother? Is it what? Because father-son is a huge theme in your movies.
Well, I mean, the reality is it's sort of mentor-mentee. I mean, he's taught me everything. He's 5 years older than I am, but, when you're 20 and 25 years old, that's a big gap.
Right.
And so he's always been my mentor and helped me get through everything. We've known each other for, over 35 years now. And so the relationship is more brotherly than it probably is mentor-mentee at this point. It's more older brother, younger brother kind of thing. You know, it's become more of a family than it has, you know, because we're both comparing notes and everything, but we pretty much are equal in terms of what we know about what we're doing.
Really?
And we rely.
Really? You're both
so.
Equal in terms of.
I know a lot about Star Wars, and he doesn't, but he knows a lot about character and family relationships and that kind of thing that he can contribute when I make a movie. When I show him.
Did you have any influence on Godfather?
No.
No. Because it's family. It's, you know, it's the kind of themes that you care about.
But that's purely Francis. I mean, well, it's Mario Puzo.
I know that, but I mean,
at the same time, Francis.
Mario Puzo didn't put it on film.
No, but Francis is very Italian and very family-oriented and very.
Oh, I see.
You know, he's extremely family-oriented.
There's a special place certainly in Star Wars, for the teacher and the idea of teaching, the idea of imparting wisdom, right? Have you ever taught? Do you teach? Because I mean, in this conversation, you know, you've got a lot to tell. Now, do you say give it to your kids? Clearly, you give it to your movies. Clearly, that's your expression. That's your audience. You're, on the one hand, in a small way, your kids; in a larger way, through movies.
That's too bad my kids don't listen to me.
Thinking about you and the work and the themes that you tell about heroes, about magic, about teaching, about sacrifice, about, you know, fear, about all the ideas that come in these movies. I think, wouldn't it be great if the two presidential candidates could just sit down and spend a weekend not campaigning and just watch these movies and think about these themes and think about these. You're looking at me with eyes that glaze over saying, what is this stupid idea he has?
No, you know.
Because, I mean, are you, I mean, when you think about, I know my colleague Bill Moyers did a conversation with you, one or more, out at Skywalker, and Joseph Campbell and the idea of myth.
Well,
it just seems to me that these are ideas that would have real wisdom.
All these ideas, Shakespeare presented all these ideas. You know, everybody could have, you know, sort of listened to Shakespeare a little bit, and we wouldn't be in quite the mess we're in today. It's not that different.
Well, he wrote about people in mess anyway. I mean,
well, but it's all about power and understanding what you're doing and family.
But some understanding of an overview of that might make us all a little bit more wise about when we put the nation at risk.
Well, I'm a strong believer in education. I'm a strong believer in math and science. But I also think it's extremely important that the humanities be taught. Because the math and science is the how, and the humanities are the why. And it's very foolish to go off on the how without the why. That's how we get into a lot of messes, because we go off and do something without understanding exactly why we're doing it. Because we do know how to do it, or we learn how to do it, and we can accomplish it. But then you ask yourself, why did we do that? And if you don't understand why you're doing something, then you're in big trouble. And that's why in current situations we find ourselves in big trouble. Because we haven't been asking the whys. We've only been saying, how do we do this?
We're not rigorous enough with ourselves.
Yes, and if you ask the why, then you can go back through history and you can see, well, here's an example of the same thing. Here's an example of the same thing. They all accomplished the how, but they never asked the why. And so they make the same mistake over and over and over again. Because, you know, the how will only get you halfway through the process. It'll get you into it, but it won't get you out of it. So then you have to sort of say, well, we should have thought of this ahead of time. And that's the thing that's really terrifying in a way, is that we don't seem to learn from history. We don't seem to learn from literature. And there's a lot of brilliant minds out there that have written great stories, told great stories, much greater than anything I've ever told. And most people aren't aware of them. And I think especially people who are going to lead should have sense enough to read some of the great literature and study history, forgetting the dates, but understand the emotional and psychological motives of the leaders that were taking over the world at the particular, whether it's Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler.
And you know what that reminds me of? I mean, to his everlasting credit, Stephen undertook the Shoah Project.
Right.
As a life's passion and a sense of responsibility that he owed.
Right.
Because he had the ability to do it, to document the Holocaust. Do you have any sense of that? It's something that there is a huge responsibility because you have an understanding of the how.
Well,
and a knowledge of the why.
What I've done, my version of what Steve has done, is education. And I have an educational foundation, educational project. And I have a foundation that's dedicated to helping to facilitate high technology in schools, which translates into, and I've been doing this for about 15 years, it translates into, okay, you've got your computers. Now what do you do with them? How does this affect the learning process? And instead of coming up with theories and going to research groups and this kind of stuff, we've gone out to all the schools and we have made documentary films about what is working in schools that are using high technology and how are they integrated it into the system and making it work to improve the learning process. It's a small niche, but I think it's extremely important because we are at this point in time where the digital world is going to completely obliterate the Industrial Revolution that, as near as I can tell, pretty much destroyed education. But now we have a chance to go back to an earlier time where education is more of a one-on-one experience and where the learning process is more of a search and more of a gathering of information and putting that information together into some kind of a project or a thought process that allows you to learn better. It's the same, you know, it's the way Aristotle taught. It's the way that a cobbler teaches. It's the way that a 5-year-old learns. You know, there is a very basic way the way human beings learn, and it's pretty simple. You know, they have to have a reason to learn. You can't teach them in the abstract. And they have to communicate with other people when they do that. They have to share their information with people. They have to learn how to work with other people, to motivate other people, to get other people they don't like to do what they want them to do. Emotional intelligence is more important in the success of a person than their intellectual intelligence. You don't get fired because you get along with people and you know how to get them to do things and you work with a group and you get along. You know, you can be semi-intelligent and have a great job. You can be brilliant and not know how to communicate with anybody and not know how to get your ideas across and not have anybody like you. And it ain't going to work, no matter how brilliant you are.
Well said. Thank you for this. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
There were thousands of things we could talk about in future conversations, and I hope we'll have a chance to do that.
Great.
George Lucas for The Hour, thank you for joining us. See you next time.